Hi, it's Friday and I'm going to continue from the dinosaurs and show you some of the university science area which lies nearby. So remember what happened to the dinosaur, and there are some more dinosaurs further on my route. So I'm going down Blackhall Road towards the road that Lamond Flag Passage leads into, and that goes towards the University Museum. These are Keble buildings on my left. The most distant being, if I'm informed rightly, called the Elephant's House because it looks like the Elephant's House in London Zoo. It's another sunny day, not thundery like it was when I did the dinosaur, probably a little bit more blowy than it has been earlier this week. Hopefully my sound baffles will stand up to that. I'm now coming onto Parks Road. And I said I was going to introduce the university science area. This is one of the first science buildings. It's called the Abbott's Kitchen, and it was the university's first chemistry laboratory. I think it was finished round about 1870, which would have been an appropriate date for that sort of thing, but I forgot to check. The interesting thing about it, and this is very Oxford, is that the design is apparently inspired or even modelled after that of a 14th century alchemist's workshop in Glastonbury. Now, I really ought to check that. That's the fact that I've always known, but when you look into these things, you often find there's more to it than in a little summary like that. And that there may have been some religious or other reason for building it to look like an alchemist's workshop. You never know here. Anyway, that is the university's first chemistry lab. I think the latest chemistry labs were finished round about 2010 with wonderful facilities for teaching. That is the Radcliffe Science Library. It's where the science books and papers used to be kept. Still are kept, though more of them are off-site storage now, and there are computer terminals too. And that, I think, to the left, that is now called Reuben College. It's a new graduate college, and I don't know very much about it, so that's all I'm going to say for the moment. This is the University Museum, together with the Pitt Rivers Anthropological Museum. Oxford University Museum of Natural History. And that is a dodo. I'm going to leave the museum for the moment. It really needs a visit on its own, and it'll be a bit crowded at the moment because it's lunchtime. So that is the museum, and I'll come back to it. There is at least one dinosaur skeleton somewhere inside, plus not very much of a dodo, as they say there. Free admission, more than a dodo. Current picture shows two whales hanging from the ceiling. And I think it's quite amazing that you can do that you can hang a whale from a building's ceiling. It looks like a fairly small one. This is the Horsebox Coffee Company. Lots of tables outside, and it's good coffee and a very nice place to have it. I sometimes come here at the end of the day, so I mention that as another choice of cafes for you. Sorry, I can go that way round. Right, let me go into the science area proper.
£1,000 plus ashlar.
I think Horsebox Coffee has one or two other outlets scattered around Oxford, and they're all worth searching out. That's the University Museum van. Note the illustrations. And here is the science area. And you will notice a wonderful jumble of styles and eras. Now on this visit, I'm not going to try to explain any of the science that's done here. That's partly because I don't have time to fill in all the background, and partly because, okay, if you look at the university's inscriptions, you get the idea that science is done by solitary heroes, often clergymen or members of aristocratic families with a bit of mummy or daddy's spare money to spend. That's, after all, is where Edmund Halley got some of his funding. And the inscriptions honour people like Halley and Boyle and Hooke and one or two others. And that was a reasonable model for science in the days when there wasn't very much of it and physical phenomena just lay around for the taking. Now things are much more complicated, and a lot of science is done by very large teams. Professors will assemble groups of students, groups of postdocs and so on, and will meticulously plan the different bits of a project that each one's doing, fit them together with other groups, and you end up with research papers that, well, I believe it's not just a rumour that there's a subatomic physics research paper that has 200 authors. You end up with that sort of complication. And obviously it's a bit challenging to explain that in half an hour. So today, at any rate, I'm just going to concentrate on letting you see the view. Now, I don't know how much connection JBS Haldane had with Oxford, but if it's the Haldane, I think it was, he was a very interesting fellow. He was a biologist who worked during the, would it have been 20s, 30s, 40s and 50s? He believed fervently that science should be popularised because the everyday man and woman should have the opportunity to understand it, use it for their own benefit in matters such as dieting, and that governments should be made to understand it so that they could, for example, enforce appropriate levies on unsafe professions and unsafe substances. He wrote a, probably weekly rather than daily, I'm not sure, column for one of the British communist papers. It might have been the Morning Star or the Daily Worker, in which he would describe in simple terms various scientific projects, often of his own, and do his best to explain them to others. He is famous for a number of essays which have been republished in books and can be found on the web, and probably the most famous is On Being the Right Size, which starts off by explaining that if you enlarged a flea to the size of a man or the size of a horse or whatever, it would not be able to jump over a building. Its abilities would not increase commensurately with its magnification, and in fact it would be pretty helpless. Physical quantities scale up in different ways depending on whether they depend on volume, area or length, and because just about everything has more than one of these, you never get the same combination of characteristics at two different sizes, so you have to understand scale. Towards the end of the essay he goes on to suggest that this is as true of social phenomena as it is of physical, and that it is as inappropriate for a man working in a factory or a collective farm to own his means of production as it would be to expect the flea to be able to jump over a building. And he is indirectly justifying some of the approaches to communism there. He wrote another essay that I like called Of All Possible Worlds, in which he visualizes various types of so-called non-Euclidean geometry, ones where parallel lines don't meet or meet twice, and so on. And that's quite fun if you've got a good visual imagination. He points out that philosophers often come to believe in their own ideas and more than they should, and therefore become useless, and that even a rabbit has more life as an experimental creature than do some philosophers. What I'm trying to say, not very well, is that he says a lot of what philosophers do should be regarded as experiments in thought and not as committing oneself to an idea for the rest of your life. If you do commit yourself, then you become as useless as an experimental rabbit that's been pumped full of drugs and can't be reused. Apologies if that seems somewhat gruesome, but it was the 30s. The only reason I hesitated about Haldane is that he came from a clever and well-connected family, and the Haldane might be a father or some other relative. But JBS Haldane is well worth reading anyway, and I do recommend Of All Possible Worlds. He was also a brave man, quite apart from anything that he may or may not have done in wartime. He experimented on himself because he thought it was the quickest way to find out how some physiological phenomena and some drugs would actually work. I think that is the new biochemistry building. Goodness. To assist police identification, all equipment on this site is marked with coded microdots. Alpha dot security systems. Ooh, I wonder what they have in there. And why they feel it necessary to warn at that particular doorway, but at none of the others. Sometimes you get the feeling that in the science area, building proceeds only slightly faster than demolition. Facilities go out of date so quickly. That is a view onto South Parks Road. No cycling. They won't obey that, you know, they never do. Well, I wasn't that far off. It looks as though they've mothballed the old anatomy departments. That is the original organic chemistry laboratory. That's chemistry that's done with molecules that contain carbon. So most of the ones that are interesting for biology, drugs and so on. And it's the Dyson Perrin's laboratory, and I think the Perrin was the same family as the people who made Lee and Perrin's Worcester sauce. Not unrich. I don't have the field of view for that. It's probably a chemistry laboratory, and I say that just because it's in the right place. That's the other side of South Parks Road. Oh, I see. They have extended the science area south. That's where the new chemistry research lab is. I'm assuming the thing on the roof is functional rather than decorative. That's the front of the Dyson Perrins. So, a National Historic Chemical Landmark, and possibly something else too, that you're probably wearing black, grey and brown like everybody else, but if you happen to be wearing something a bit more coloured, then it may owe its ancestry to the Perkin mentioned there, the W.H. Perkin. If that is the same William Perkin who discovered aniline dyes, he could be seen as having made coloured clothing other than by expensively extracted natural vegetable dyes readily available. Right, I'm now back on South Parks Road, and I think you've probably seen as much of the science area as you want to. If you need any designs for a future dystopia, take them. On the corner, until very recently, was a brutalist 1960s building devoted to psychology and zoology. So ugly that the University Ivy Club pledged that every member would plant a sprig of ivy in front of it in the hope of hiding it from view. That's now been demolished, and they are putting or have put a replacement. This is the end of South Parks Road. What's ahead is a cycle path that goes to roads in the New Marston estate, the southernmost part of what I visited when I did the Jack Russell video. And that is St Cross Road on the right, which goes down to Holywell Street and then to the High Street, Longwall Street, and that latter bit is not very pleasant because it's where all the traffic's been routed through. Well, that's fair enough. There'll probably be some people in there, once the building is commissioned, studying the problem of consciousness. How is consciousness generated? How do you know somebody is conscious? And what is it for? And that is often called the hard problem in philosophy. Nobody seems to know how to get a grip on it. Celebrate everything. It's such a problem. Well, that's about as far as I'm going to go, or can go, with the science area. And I'm going to split the video here. It seems an appropriate breaking point. and change to something completely different. So see you in a few minutes.